Hi. Um, there's something I've been wanting to share for a while, and I'm finally going to share it today because even though it's been a long time since I've ridden a school bus, when I tell this story to some of my friends, they can't believe it. But I grew up in North Carolina because my mother's husband was in the Marine Corps, and I I remember the bus drivers were high school students from early on, and to me that was normal. It's the first time I saw an adult driving a school bus was in another state. I thought it was so weird because, again, like I said, I was used to high school students driving to school buses. Now, why North Carolina allowed that at the time, I'll never know. Probably because it was cheaper to hire the high school students. But from what I understand, they had to be at least 16 and a half years old, and I think they had to have a certain grade average. But the buses were also rigged so that they couldn't go above like 45 miles an hour. So it was interesting, especially when you're in traffic and traffic is, zooming way ahead of you, you're way behind. They really couldn't, you know, rev up the speed to go faster. So, but anyway, I think that was more of a safety issue because of, the drivers were so young and these were big buses. So, looking back, it's kind of amazing to have these young drivers driving these huge vehicles with no supervision on the bus. Um, but anyway, for the most part, I didn't experience any issues on the bus as far as like bad driving or accidents or anything like that. I did have some bullying that continued on the bus. That I experienced it throughout school, and it extended to the bus too. But there was a period of time that does stick with me because it was pretty traumatic. It was my junior high year, seventh and eighth grade, and our bus driver, I'll never forget her name. I still remember it, but she encouraged the bullying to continue on the bus, and it was the bullying during that time was definitely much worse. And um, she actually was a pothead too. In fact, I lived at that time in junior high. I lived the furthest from the school than most of the other students, and so it was probably about 10 to 12 miles. And part of that route, it was not very developed, and there was some wooded, forested area too. So it was probably halfway between our homes and school. She would sometimes pick up her friends and let them get on the bus, and they would smoke pot while she drove, and she would also partake in smoking the pot, the pipe, and none of us was saying anything. We were actually kind of quiet while this happened because I think a lot of us were afraid actually to even speak up because she wasn't really a very nice person. So, and then there was several times that we weren't being picked up in the morning to be taken to school, and most of us that were waiting for the bus didn't have another ride to school because we had parents who worked too. So some of us would just stay out there for a while, waiting for the bus, and the bus would eventually come. Now, um, after like the third or fourth time, my first hour teacher, and I was the only student in that class that was on that bus. And so after the third or fourth time, my teacher um, asked me what was going on. I knew what was going on, but I was too afraid to be honest. And so I told her I didn't know because I was trying to, protect myself too from further bullying, and because I was afraid of that bus driver. She was not very nice. And there were also a couple of times that I was called over to the high school. The junior high building was right next to the high school, so I would have to walk over there, and the principal would have me in there with this bus driver asking me what was going on. So apparently, somebody must have been calling into the school to report what was going on. It was not me, but I guess this bus driver was assuming that it was me because, after all, I was the scapegoat and I was the one that was being bullied, and she encouraged the bullying. And so she probably thought it was me trying to tattle on her, but I was too afraid to tattle on her. But so anyway, the principal would ask me questions and I would deny everything. And then he'd send me back to the junior high building. And um, but I survived during that time. And um, but that's how I know what smoke pot smells like. It's not a real pleasant smell. And but she did this the whole 2 years of my junior high years, seventh and eighth grade. And so in high school, we had a different bus driver because I believe that bus driver for my junior high, I think she had already graduated. So we had a new bus driver when I started ninth grade. And I drove the bus all the way through high school because I didn't have my own car. I was not one of those kids who was lucky enough where parents helped them buy a car. Or even I wasn't even allowed to get a job to even buy my own car. But it would have been nice to be able to not have to ride the bus throughout my entire school years. But yeah, so when I tell people about having a high school bus driver, they I don't know if they really believe me or not, but several years ago, I was actually talking to somebody, and somebody in Illinois when I was where I was living at the time, and I was telling she was telling me that her husband was from North Carolina, and he had joined the military, and that's actually how she ended up in Illinois too. So I told her, I said, well, I grew up in North Carolina. I'm from Florida, but I grew up in North Carolina, outside Camp Lejeune. And so I just kind of mentioned to her, I said, I had high school students driving my buses throughout school. And she said, yes, my husband was one of those bus drivers. And I was like, so you believe me then? She says, oh, yes. And she couldn't believe it herself when her husband first told her about that he was a bus driver in high school. But yeah, so it is true that North Carolina used to have high school students drive the buses. And I believe it was because it was cheaper for them. They could pay them less than an adult than they would have to pay an adult. But since then, I think North Carolina got smart and they did away with that. And now they hire adults to drive the school buses. I think one reason for that is because of so many reports of irresponsible driving among the younger drivers. I mean, I do remember um, other school. With other schools, not in my school district, but there had been, a handful of accidents that I still remember. A couple of them involved trains um, colliding into the buses. I guess when the buses didn't stop at the railroad crossing. Which, speaking of which, this pothead bus driver, she would also do that too. She wouldn't even stop at the railroad crossing. A lot of times she would try to rev up the engine, which the buses were rigged to not go above 45 miles an hour. But I do remember there was one railroad crossing in particular, because it was kind of rough, and everybody would be cheering her on to speed over the railroad tracks. And I think the other kids were kind of hoping that we would kind of fly over the railroad tracks, which we didn't actually fly over the railroad tracks. But she was irresponsible, not only by not stopping at the railroad crossing, but also, participating in smoking pot, um, while she was driving. Believe it or not, that did happen. And so, anyway, but that's my story of having high school students driving my school buses that I had to ride to school every day throughout my school years. So, thank you for listening.